Welcome to Focus on Growth. I'm Tom Doorley of Sage Partners. I'll be your host today. As we've been doing for the last several months, we're going to be focusing on the challenges that face us as change hits us from technology, from demographics, from politics, and how it is we deal with it. The idea is we need help to navigate the fog of change. My guests today are Bob Kueppers and Dave Rosenblum, both of whom are Sage partners with me, and we're going to bring our expertise on governance to talk about how the board can help us all get through these issues. Anytime we're facing dramatic change, we need to reach out and find all the help we can, and the board can be that kind of help. Dave sits on right now the board of Hanmi Bank, a public company, as well as other boards, and Bob comes to us after a distinguished career at Deloitte and head of the Deloitte Directors Series, where it explored important issues for Deloitte and for its clients in this area. Now, I'd like to start by asking each of you to talk a little bit about the role of the board. Now, I know this could be a 3-day seminar itself, but let's try to make it sort of simple to sort of set the table. So, Bob, talk about how you see the board being helpful. What is the role of the board?
Well, the role of the board and the role of management are sort of intertwined in a way, but they're very distinct. I always start by saying the board is the oversight mechanism. It's the independent look at what's going on in the business, and sits on top of management in terms of evaluation and hiring and making sure the right team is there to move the business forward. And I always try and make it as simple as I can. So the board is oversight, management is execution. Now, neither of those things can happen without collaboration. So the board and management do collaborate on strategy, and they generally get agreement. But once they're there and it's time to execute, people don't always stay in their lane, but principally, management has to get the job done under the oversight of the board of directors, just simply stated.
Dave, what would you add to that?
Well, I just say from an oversight standpoint, and the board's responsibilities fall into 3 buckets. One is oversight of strategy. Second is oversight of risk. And the third is oversight of the CEO, which is basically the whole cycle of selecting, monitoring, evaluating, compensating, ultimately replacing the CEO. And basically everything boards do fall within those 3 buckets. A short sort of way of describing the role of the board versus management is the board is noses in but fingers out, and because management is responsible for running the business.
I think that's good. That sort of sets the context now for what it is we talk about. So let's now drop into this issue of the fog of change. The idea comes from this imagery of the fog of war, when in battle, once everything hits, it is just hard to figure out what to do. So we need to figure out how to make it happen. The first challenge, I think, for both leadership and the board is to make sure that we agree that there's a need for change. We have to make the case for change. Change is hard. Who wants to change? And it's such a challenge to us that we need to make sure that everybody in the organization understands why this is necessary. Talk about how the board can help get at this issue, can help sort of construct this change agenda.
Well, it does feel as if presently, I mean, we're here, right where we are right now as a country, and as a business community, there's there's less that's settled and more that's up in the air. And all of this is kind of swirling around to create the fog you mentioned in terms of the fog of change. That is a huge challenge for both management and the board, given that the uncertainties seem to be outweighing the opportunities that one can count on to execute to a good outcome. And if you don't talk about it, if you don't work together on figuring out what the priorities are, what the risks are, and the opportunities, I think you're sort of left stuck, and you don't move forward. And so right now, what we're talking about here And what we're seeing in the marketplace is almost an unprecedented amount of questions that don't yet have answers because of new developments, because of just changes in the environment. Um, I mean, how many times do we talk about tariffs? 5 years ago, and all of a sudden, it's a daily discussion and thing that we're all following to see what impact it could have on either the businesses we invest in, or the businesses we work in, or the clients that we work with. To me, it is it's the perfect I don't know, overlay to what we're all going through. And I love the term only because it is as imprecise as the environment feels in the present time.
Dave?
Yeah. Well, I think a couple of things from a macro standpoint. Boards can raise issues that may not yet be on the management agenda. I mean, it's being a CEO or senior executive of a company of any size or complexity is a hard job, and you've got a lot of things you have to worry about. And so you can see, management teams become sort of tunnel visioned, if you would, because they're trying to execute against a plan. They know their compensation depends on it, and they don't have the time that particularly directors who are not working full time have to, read, look at um, uh, things that are occurring, uh, take away from investments that they may have in venture capital ideas that are percolating on the horizon that you can raise those types of issues. At the same time, there has to be a discussion of what's the impact now on some of these uncertainties. Our earnings calls for the public company board I'm on have moved to providing guidance to our analysts uh, related to if this happens, this is percentage impact on earnings. If that happens, this is the percentage impact potentially. We aren't giving them specific earnings targets, but we know they're working earnings models. And I mean, we did an earnings call last week, and we provided an estimate of what potential impact is if the government stays shut down, because we've got an SBA lending business, and you can't originate that business without the government being open. We
Right.
also have provided guidance around interest rates because there's uncertainty, and so that is actually something new that we've been doing.
And that is a useful contribution, I think, of the board to say we need to step back and find a different way to talk to our investors. So that leads us into the natural situation. So if we can make the case that this is a time for important change, we need to find a way to focus our organization. And what we've been talking about and working on with our clients is this idea of a leaders change agenda, that it says of all the things you could do, listen, here are the 5 things, whatever, small number of things that we're going to work on. How does the board contribute to setting or guiding the development of that leaders change agenda, the things we're going to focus on? Bob?
Well, I mean, it's as you were describing that, Tom. The first thing that comes to my mind is it seems daunting at first blush because
Mm-hmm.
the amount of uncertainty and the inability to predict with any confidence, a high level of confidence, which things are going to come into play seems to be dominating the conscious thought these days. And
Yes.
I mean, it still needs to be dealt with. And the leaders change agenda is something that probably needs to be extremely fluid because
Yes.
the factors which influence how you spend your time and resources on either preventing problems or solving ones that you didn't ask for are all going to be driven by this external um, these external forces that are they're coming to bear on every business that we work with. It's different. I'm not saying it's unprecedented, but it's kind of in that realm in my
Yeah.
mind
Yeah.
because of the pace of what's changing and how much is coming at us, all of us, at the same time.
And I like that point you make that the leaders change agenda is not fixed in stone. It's not like Many years ago in the halcyon days that we all remember of strategy consulting, you had a 5-year plan. And by God, for 5 years, that was it.
Yeah.
This time, the leaders change agendas, version one. And then there's going to be a version 2 and 3 and so on. We have to know that, Dave.
Yeah, I think that the, the change agenda to me is really what's your strategy that you're
Yep.
trying to execute against, because what are the key elements of the strategy? What are you going to do and what are you not going to do, which is often as important as deciding what you're going to do. And what are the options that you're leaving open so that, if things pivot in an unexpected direction or if things slow or accelerate. I mean, give an example, if you're on a bank board, the regulatory framework has changed. And so we've had at my bank a lot of work preparing for crossing one of the thresholds where you get increased regulation. That's been a long-term strategy. Now we're looking at, given that the thresholds are probably going to change, how much do we keep investing? Do we slow it down? And that's, sort of staying on top of the environment. The board members also, if you have the right board and they know the business well, the industry well, can bring ideas saying, why aren't you looking at this? We need growth. Why aren't we pursuing something in this
Mm-hmm.
market, and force a discussion around what are you doing to drive growth on top of your historic business, and how do you protect the historic business to the extent that it can be protected given the
Yeah.
changes that are going on.
So that's a nice segue into this idea that we see is that we need capabilities. Bob, you talked early on about risk, and Dave, you said one of the buckets that the board has to worry about is risk. We see there's sort of two things that kind of have to interact here in a way that makes sense. One is the whole idea of risk that our Sage Partners, Larry Bettingson, was a naval officer. And when he was on the bridge and they would go into a fog bank, he would call up other people to be lookouts. And there need to be more than one lookout to see what was going on. The lookout's only job was to sense danger and to get ahead of the storm. On the other hand, anytime there's massive change, market share is up for grabs. New products come out, new ways of dealing with our customers come out. So there's opportunity. So I think there needs to be a second capability that we're calling now the scout opportunity, somebody who's seeking opportunities. So we've got these two capabilities, lookouts and scouts. And psychology will tell you that rarely, maybe never, are those two talents in equal capability of the same person. I know myself, I'm much better at the opportunity side of things, frankly, not so good at the danger piece. So the board would seem to be that there is a natural role being above the fray to participate in being lookouts or scouts.
Absolutely. But see, the way I like what you just said, Tom, because um, what percentage of boards that you might work with or run into are going
Mm-hmm.
to have the right balance at the right time? In other words, you may have some people who are are are, are great lookouts in
Mm-hmm.
a time when opportunity is really what you need to be exploiting. I mean, nothing's perfect. So both are important. Depending on the business, where it is, where it's going, and what your strategy is. Um, to me, using those skills of the board to maximize the execution of your strategy, even though that's management's job, they can be extremely helpful in guiding the operation of the business plan that's set out to uh, make that strategy a reality.
Yeah, I think having clarity around who's responsible for what,
Yeah.
recognizing that everyone has to worry about risk, and most people need to worry about growth and all. In the industries I'm familiar with, it's pretty common to use the three lines of defense model. And in my view of the world, and certainly the board I'm on, what we try to execute is first line is what's facing off against customers and includes operations. But I mean, their job is to drive revenue and manage cost and deliver. You've got a second line that deals with risk. I mean, we're banks, so we have a chief risk officer. The second line deals with risk and compliance issues and is always involved in development of new products, etc. Typically from early on, because you don't want to have the scouts come up with stuff and then have it delayed because you have to rework it when it gets to the risk people. And then we've got the third line would be, the independent audit. But I think if you think about, responsibilities and, that three lines of defense model, it actually works pretty well, I think, in creating the balance that's needed.
So that now dovetails or segues also into the issue of if we believe that scouts and lookouts are not equally present in the individual, what happens when you have a situation where the leadership, the CEO, was terrific during fair weather, not so good during the storm? What does the board do now?
Well, you have to evaluate whether you have the right CEO. I mean, that's one of the three responsibilities I cited. Oversight of strategy, oversight of a risk, and oversight of the CEO. And sometimes you'll conclude. Sometimes the board can work with the CEO and buttress them and get them help, but sometimes you reach a conclusion that the CEO just is not right, fit for purpose.
Well, to your point, David, there are great CEOs. There are probably far fewer who are CEOs for all seasons, if you will. When things shift and change, your last 2 years might have been just gangbusters, and you hit it out of the park, if you will. But then, if your business is impacted by something that is completely out of the realm of the experience of that CEO, at least you got to have a conversation about whether you still have the right person, given what's changed. I mean, I think that's what it comes down to. And the board, that's where the board comes in for sure.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. One of the things we've seen, I think it was at Facebook or Meta, last January or so, they changed the party responsible for government affairs, regulatory affairs, because they were dealing with the new administration, and that was not CEO, but a very, very visible. I mean, I think that the person that was escorted out had been a former senior government minister in the UK government, and he was deemed not fit for purpose in what is clearly a very different world from a regulatory and government affairs standpoint.
Right. So when we started the conversation, we talked about the importance of collaboration, that the board and management have to be almost partners in the activity here. So looking back, and we've both had several years of experience, several decades of experience, let's talk about whether we're actually getting better at it. Are boards and management better at collaborating? I recall the first major strategy engagement I had was with the CEO of a Fortune 500 company. And he had a cynical attitude. Now, this goes back many years ago, I'm going to say, and it does, decades. It had a cynical attitude. He said that I create this huge board book, and I send it to my directors sometime early in the week where we're going to have the meeting. And it's a huge book. It has lots of data in it. And not only that, each time I do it, I reorganize the data. So they think they've got everything they need, but I know I'm the only one who knows what's going on. That was pretty cynical. Now, hopefully that is past. Bob, are we better at collaboration than my CEO John was?
By the way, I had not heard that one. I have to stop and chuckle for at least a minute. The notion of I really need my board to have my back and to be a partner in running this business, either strategically or otherwise, and then have the CEO say, "Well, I'm just going to reshuffle the deck; they'll never figure it out." That doesn't seem to be. It's suboptimal in my mind, right? But
right.
I think you already knew that. Look, I think it's extremely difficult to take the pieces we're all talking about now. I mean, I'm talking about the scouts and the other and this and that, and have it work in a way that is somewhat efficient and somewhat effective. When things change, some organizations seem to be able to pick up on that and swerve or turn whatever way it needs to go. Others seem just ill prepared to deal with big changes that come, and it's always hard. I'm not criticizing anybody in particular, but if you have a team that is facile at dealing with change, I mean, that's a huge advantage in the marketplace.
Mhm.
I don't care what industry you're in, and there's just so many things that bear on that. But people that think they always have it figured out and they always know exactly what to do are kidding themselves. That's for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tom, I can only speak from personal experience. So I'm sure if somewhere there's a CEO of the sort you described, perhaps more likely in private companies these days than in public companies. And of course, there are a lot fewer public companies than there were 20 years ago.
Hmm.
But CEOs don't select their boards anymore. I mean, the boards for most public companies are selected by the Nom Gov committee, which has to be comprised of independent directors. And you clearly have the CEO involved in the interviewing process and all, but the old model of the CEOs really controlling board selection and then being able to keep people distracted with a variety of things. I just don't think that uh, is very prevalent anymore. And because of the rise over the last decade or more of the activist investors, I just think there's better accountability, and so I
Yeah.
haven't seen the board books that you couldn't digest in
No.
recent
Right.
years.
No. As I said, this was some time ago, right? And I'm glad it's over, and I'm glad that you believe that, and I think it's true that we're seeing more collaboration because the board is an asset. Management invests a lot of money and time and effort in the board, and it really need to be able to call on it. So as we close here, Bob, just one sort of thing that you'd like to say to to the C-suite, to a leader of an organization about the board, just sort of one message if you can.
Well, this is going to sound maybe a little naive, but um, if you view your board as an asset to you personally as a
Yeah.
leader, and you can actually recount the times where working together, or maybe you just were stuck, and you had people in your milieu there that you could call upon and get past that issue and get something right, something good for the company, including the shareholders. That means that you've got a lot of value in whether you put it together or it happened organically. It doesn't matter. But if you've got people you can work with and people you can solve problems with, and you have enough uh, trust and honesty to be able to speak frankly with them, that's a huge leg up in the current world, because there are still boards that function like it was the 80s, I'm sure,
Hmm.
far
Yeah.
fewer. But if you've got that kind of relationship, it's something of great value, and it isn't just for you as the boss or you as the independent chairman of the board, perhaps, but for the shareholders and everybody, all the stakeholders, the employees, everybody that work at the company, and it's something to not only recognize but to celebrate and double down on it if you can.
Dave, your
Yeah,
advice?
yeah. Mine would be, for CEOs to recognize that directors uh, are very aligned with CEOs in terms of wanting the corporation to succeed. If you think about who board members are, they're men and women who have been successful, often highly successful in
Hmm.
business and professional careers. They don't want to be embarrassed by being associated with a company that does not succeed. And so they can be used for their expertise uh, and are interested typically and being consulted on how do we make the business better? How do we grow more successfully? How do we, you know, avoid risks that are out there? How do we deal with people? And I would just say recognize that board members want you to succeed because they want the company to succeed and are there to help.
I like that, and I think you're right. I think we are doing a better job of collaborating, better job of figuring out how to leverage the assets we have. So thank you both for this conversation, and I'd like to thank everybody who is listening for paying attention. Just remember that in a time of massive change, we need all the help we can get. The board is an asset. Go use them, take them, get help from them. Thank you for listening. Take care. Change has never come faster or hit us harder. In the fog, leadership is the light that cuts through. I'm Tom Doorley. Thanks for joining me on our Focus on Growth, Navigating the Fog of Change series. Until the next time, keep leading forward.